Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to Projections, our show about virtual reality, augmented reality, and the changing ways we interact with our computers.
Something we think about a lot.
And someone else who thinks about that a lot, for decades even, is our guest this week. His name is Kevin Kelly, and he was the co-founder of Wired magazine.
Yeah, the editor-in-chief, I think, for almost most of the 90s.
And influential in movies like The Matrix, and even was a consultant on Minority Report, someone who researches and thinks about what the future will look like as it's changing in real time. One of the technologies he's been researching is virtual reality. So we brought Kevin in to have a conversation about the inevitable technological forces that are going to change our world. Kevin Kelly, thank you so much for coming by. We've had you on Still Entitled, our other podcast before, and since then you came on to talk about cool tools, but since then you've released this book. It's called The Inevitable, and can you describe the book?
It's projection, kind of a forecast of what the next 20 to 30 years in the digital realm would be like. And it's mostly trends. You really can't predict specifics. They're unpredictable, but we can talk about trends. And so these are the general directions that technology will take in the next 2 or 3 decades.
2 or 3 decades, that's like a useful time to
that's
think
a
about
generation. That's maybe within the lifetime of most of us. And but beyond that, it gets much more difficult to see and also even less useful.
Yeah, you say projections. It's funny because that's the name of our show about virtual reality and augmented reality, both in terms of looking toward the future and the objects that we see in these screens. And so where does VR fit into this outlook of the future?
So I place VR in the context of the general trends of interacting with our machines in our environment. And when we started making computers, I got to see them when I was very young. My dad was kind of involved. And I went to one of the first computer trade shows in 1965 in, I think it was Asbury Park, New Jersey. And the computers at that point were entire rooms. And then over time they shrunk to the size of, cabinets, refrigerators, and then they came these workstations that were kind of like a filing cabinet next to your desk. And then they hopped onto your desk. And then they hopped onto your lap. And then they hopped into our pockets. And the next obvious step is that they're against our skin that we wear, and then they're in our skin. But ultimately, the best way we want for interacting with our environment is to go into the computer itself.
Right.
And that's what VR and AR is we're going inside the thing, and we have full interaction so that our entire bodies and all our gestures are the way that we interact and our voices. And that's the pattern. And so we're moving to the point where we're going to have the ultimate interaction, which is to go inside these things.
Did you have any experience with the earlier generations of virtual reality than the current? I would say, like, right now, we've experienced a resurgence since Oculus had their Kickstarter several years ago. It's been this great new thing. But it had several false starts, at least in terms of being a consumer product. You were the editor of Wired for a number of years. I imagine you had some experience with that?
Well, yes. Actually, I had got the chance to try out virtual reality with VPL, Jaron Lanier, who invented the term in 1988, 1989. And I was there when Jaron actually was inventing the goggles and the glove, and he had a world which you could have more than one person inside. And the quality was actually not that much different from this device here. Okay, it was all there in 1989. And there's several things that happened. One was I thought, this is going to change the world. And so I actually organized the first public access to VR called Cyberthon in 1989. It was a 24-hour visit. We sold tickets, and every single VR rig that existed at that time, including stuff from the military, was available for people to try out. In 1989, Cyberthon.
Cyberthon.
Right. And I was wrong about it happening in the next 5 years. And it's interesting as to why, because the quality, as I said, was almost as good as this. But what the difference was, that gear cost in today's dollar $1 million. It was $1 million worth of stuff. The head tracking stuff, gear alone, was very, very sensitive and was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, what's happened since '89 and now is not that the quality has gotten better, but that the price is reduced by 100,000-fold. So this technology hijacked the technology in smartphones. There were 3 parts of the smartphone that became a commodity that were put into here. And the first thing was this head tracking stuff. So the location, accelerometers became not $100,000, but a little tiny chip that you could put into this thing. The second thing was the screens themselves were stolen from the smartphone because they were very expensive before, and now you have these high-res things that become the screen. And then the third thing was the big processors, the video processors, also became another chip on a commodity. So these have now hijacked the commoditization of smartphones, and now you have technology that's good enough to improve.
Interesting, because I think a lot of people would still say price is a barrier.
Well, I think price is a barrier still, but we're on this road that's going to follow like Moore's law.
Completely agree.
And one of the things that's still missing is actually the interaction, because what the studies have shown is that more than 50% of your sense of immersion in these worlds comes from the senses other than visual, the tactile senses, audio, your movements, your hands. This gives you, when you can interact with your full body, that's when you get the sense of presence. It's not just what you see. You have to have the full environment. And so we're still kind of waiting on from some of these other parts to really reach that level of commodity.
But it's interesting because you say that even 3 decades ago, the basic principles on the research side of what's needed to have a compelling, virtual and believable virtual experience was all kind of understood back then, from the need for head tracking and interaction model with hands. You even mentioned a social multiplayer environment. These are all things that we find are very strong bringers of presence today. So it's really just the technology and the economics catching up with the research.
Yeah. It's. I mean, I think. I think we know enough to keep improving it. We actually don't know very much at all about how this works, why it works, and what will work best.
You mean psychologically?
Yes. So my analogy for how VR kind of works is that it's really very analogous to what happens in cinema. Right? So we go to a movie and we see a rocket ship zooming across the sky, and there's no doubt in our mind that it zoomed across the sky, that its movement was real, but in fact there is no movement. It's just one still image after another. There is no movement. That movement is entirely something we construct. And this technology, cinema, it exploits a trick of our own nervous system to give that sense. And what VR does is the same thing. It tricks our nervous system for us to believe that there's a presence that isn't there. And even intellectually, our mind may know that it's not there, but we are feeling that presence. Okay? And so that presence can be amplified by not just visually, but also tactical and audio as well, can lead to us to really believe that it's there. And it's not that we believe with our conscious mind, but we believe with our kind of reptilian mind.
Right.
So the common, experiment or demo of a VR is you have a plank that you're asked to walk out onto, and it's a mile down, and you're standing in the same room that you were a minute ago, but now you have this trick on your brain, and your body can't do it. Your body believes that it's on the edge and about to die, even though intellectually you understand that you can't. But your body is controlling what you believe. And so that's a trick. And there are other kinds of tricks that we've understood about VR, like redirected walking, which is, again, the creators of a world can show you that when you're pivoting around 90 degrees, they cheat a little bit and don't show you the full movement, maybe by 10 degrees, and they can compound that cheat by having you walking around in a circle in a room, but you believe that you're walking in a straight line for a mile. Yeah. So they're redirecting you by tricking your brain. And you are fully convinced that you're walking in a straight line forever, but you're actually just walking around in circles. And they can do the same thing with redirected touching, where you think you're grabbing 3 different bottles, but you're actually grabbing the same bottle again and again. Okay? So these are tricks. And the thing is that this field is full of things that we're going to trick that we don't even know yet. And we won't. The only way we'll find out is through more VR. The only way we'll figure out how our brain works with VR is through VR itself.
And so there's this great feedback loop, because previously all these tricks, and we've heard about these tricks before we visited labs like USC and Stanford, and the gear has previously been expensive. And so as they are uncovering these tricks over the past 30 years, now the research must be exponentially growing because of the mass market of these
exactly. So we didn't have any idea their brains worked this way, but now we do. But there are probably going to be other tricks that we can use to decrease the weight, to maybe even remove goggles entirely. I mean, we have these retina displays where the light goes right into your eyes directly, so you could kind of imagine some kind of VR world where there are just lasers pointing to you and you're not even wearing anything on your face. Those would be tricks that we only discover by doing these things. We're not going to discover them by thinking about it or by neurological experiments. It's only going to be in using this technology that we're going to discover how the technology works and how we can make it better.
Yeah, I mean, applications are also a big driving force, right? And the thing that makes this appealing in a consumer product right now is entertainment, games. In your research and from the people you've talked to, what are the what are the other applications you find compelling?
Yeah, so it's very obvious that some of the early adopters for the virtual reality version will be gamers. And that's sort of already happened. But there are kind of 2 versions of this interaction. We've heard one, the virtual reality VR, where you put the goggles on and you have a full immersion in another world. And again, it's very convincing. I find that that sense of immersion really does take place. And the more interaction that you have, the more convincing it is. But there's another version called AR, augmented reality, or sometimes people call it MR, mixed reality, where it mixes the 2. And there you take a pair of clear glasses and you can see this room that you're in, or your work office or your home, and then there's projected the presence of virtual things, objects or people, into the real world. Okay? And technically that's much more difficult to do, because you have certain technical issues about the opacity of, if I'm having a projection, how do I have something brighter light through you? And there's registration. There's a lot more going on. So technically, it's much more difficult. However, if you can do the latter, the mixed reality, then you can do VR very easily just by painting the glasses black.
Right. Yeah.
So MR, AR, is the holy grail in some senses of what people are trying to do, because if they can get that, then they can just make the VR really easily. So the MR, the AR, I think actually has the potential to reach the consumer before VR does. There's a lot more use cases that we could imagine what you could do with the Magic glasses. And people like Magic Leap, HoloLens from Microsoft, and others, Meta, they're all trying to make this AR, MR. And the first thing is that it's the Microsofts of the world believe that this is the future of the office. That with these Magic glasses on, and you can be in your office. You can have as many screens as you want, virtual screens, and having used these virtual screens myself, I'm really impressed by it. I can read them very easily, I can manipulate them. Of course, it requires being able to read your gestures, but you can have as many as you want, and then you can have, if you're working on a project, whether it's an object or in a space that you can go visit, you can bring your work virtually in front of you. For training, it's amazing because it's like watching YouTube videos, but 10,000 times better, because you can take things apart. So it really works great for people who who think differently, who think kinetically, who aren't so read-oriented. But like other forms of VR and AR, the most powerful thing in these is not the objects and not the worlds, but other people. And when you can have telepresence with these magic glasses, you can have a colleague who's sitting next to you. And the thing I want to say about the telepresence is that even if the depiction of that avatar is not photorealistic, or 100% photorealistic, even if it doesn't look real, it feels real. That's the trick.
Yeah.
Is it feels like that person's next to you. And there's 3 qualities that if that avatar can carry those 3 qualities, you are convinced. And those 3 qualities are, can it capture or mirror the body language of this person? And so you have to have really good capture technology. So you're captured somewhere else, and you're getting the micro gestures, the micro expressions on their faces. If they can capture that and project it onto an avatar, plus their voice, which we really zero in on as an identifier, then an eye contact, so their eyes are following you around. If those 3 things are present, you believe that they're there. You feel as if they're there. And it's a very different experience than just seeing their face on a screen. You don't feel if they're really there. I mean...
It totally passes the uncanny valley of
right.
presence.
But here, even if it's slightly cartoony, that person's there.
Yeah.
And so that's the power of the presence. And my description is we experience those people. We experience this. And the great, and this is true just in VR as well, by the way, which is that whether they're in AR, VR, if that person avatar is catching these things, then they're really there. And out of all the things that we can experience the presence of, whether it's really cool stuff or amazing worlds, the most powerful thing in VR is other people. Okay, and so I go so far to say in my book that VR will be the most social of all the social media. It's going to be the place where the power of social and the social media just takes off.
That's why Facebook spent that money to buy Oculus.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so. And there are some other reasons which we can get into in a minute. But I believe so that they really do believe that is the social platform.
Just talking about AR for another minute. Our experience with AR so far has been that if VR is in its early days, AR is in its very early days.
Right.
And I'm wondering, how long do you think it will be until we get the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive of augmented reality?
Yeah.
And what will that look like?
So I have seen the AR and MR rigs that exist that are public, including Magic Leap, and in terms of their prototypes, they're there. It works. It's amazing. What's interesting about it is, because of this, there's a lot of conflicting terminology, but they call it a light field capture and a retina display. What's interesting about that is that there are no pixels. First of all, the resolution is just amazing. And I don't know exactly how it's done, and this is part of the problem, but there's apparently no pixels. There's no screen door sensation that you get on with these kinds of things. And there's already kind of, that helps a lot in that kind of presence. The registration is pretty good. The field of vision is fair. The opacity issues are okay. They're not solved, but they're good enough. What it comes down to is going to be the form factor. Is like, how clunky are these things? How transparent are they? What is the price? They're mostly all going to be tethered onto a pack. And then these other questions of your hands and interaction and sound and all these other things, the other 50%. So my estimates is that this is still 5 to 10 years away. I would say 10 years as a safe bet. So in between now and 10 years, you're going to be an early adopter. You're going to be overpaying for it. But you also have the opportunity to discover some of the most important things in the easy hanging fruit.
It's the Wild West, yeah.
If you want to experiment in this death zone as a business. I mean, it's going to be very tough to make money, I think. And let me just say a few words about making money. I don't think anybody from Oculus to Magic Leap or HoloLens at Microsoft is expecting to make money selling the gear. The gear is going to be a loss leader.
Just like in the video game consoles. It's all the software. And
the big golden goose is the data. Okay? So in order to do really full immersive VR, you have to start tracking everything about your movements, and you want to have backward-facing cameras capturing your micro expressions. Software, we already know how to distinguish genuine, true emotions on humans. We know what that is, and we can project that into these avatars. So we're going to capture not just like where you're going shopping, but your emotional state every single moment along the way, each hesitation, where you're gazing. I mean, we're going to incredibly intimate aspects digitized of our lives that it would be so expensive to do in real life.
A lot of people would be a little bit frightened by what you just said.
Right, it's a total surveillance state. VR is going to be a total surveillance state that we voluntarily enter into.
Because the appeal, because the very things you talk about, the things that make social compelling, those three qualities, are the very things that they want to accumulate, the data they want to accumulate.
So the VR companies, the platform ones, are going to have the biggest, most richest, deepest, most intimate database of millions of people in the most intimate aspects of their lives. And the biggest data companies are the biggest companies in the world. All the big companies in the world today are all sitting on big data, and that's where their wealth is. So this is going to become, they're going to become some of the richest companies in the world, the biggest and richest, and they're going to have a huge database of millions of people every microsecond of their life and their emotional state and everything else. And that is the wealth. And then on that you build economic stuff, trade, art. It's big. And that's what they're all aiming for. The ones who are taking the long term, like Magic Leap and I think Facebook as well. They're looking at that saying, no, that's this world. So this gear is like, however long it takes to get it right, we're just going to be there because the payoff on this is huge. It's not at all about hardware. It's not even about the social graph. It's about capturing your emotional, experiential life in the billions. 2 billion people, emotional life, oh my gosh.
And Kevin, this is way beyond what you even imagined. 15 years ago when you were consulting on Minority Report, we saw glimpses of this surveillance, eye tracking, but they didn't have the headsets.
And the capture that he was talking about before.
Yeah, well, on the human gestures, that was actually our ideas, which was that people would interface with their computers not just with their fingertips, but with their whole bodies and their voice.
And it was so resonant because when you first watched that, even though today we realize that having maybe your arms held out for half an hour at a time is exhausting, but it resonated with people because it was diminishing the interface between computers and humans beyond the mouse and keyboard. It was exactly what we thought going into that digital space. Now, you said like AR and VR, we can't get around wearing the headsets right now in 5 to 10 years. AR, and Google Glass famously was an early experiment in some type of mixed reality, but socially rejected. And that was one of the failings, I think, of that. So, in this next 5 to 10 years, as the technology becomes solvable, will the social problems become solvable and will become socially accepted?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there was a number of things that Google Glass failed on, but for me, the primary culprit was the fact that they were recording. I think if there was no recording in Google Glass, it would have been much more accepted.
You mean it was just a display device for the user and not a capture for the world?
Right. That was what freaked people out. was the fact that you were walking around recording things. If it had just been a display device, it would have been geeky, and a few people would have used it, but they could have gone on to keep iterating it until it wasn't so dorky. But it was the fact that it was recording that just was too many steps ahead. I mean, I think we're going there. That'll come, but that was just too many steps all at once. And so, and it's back apparently. They've resurrected it, and I think for sure that they're going to continue. And I know they have a really great group at Google working with all kinds of things, and they're pretty committed. And so it'll be back. There'll be some version of wearable glasses that have a display in them. Although I think if we go beyond 1 or 2 decades into 50 years or 60 years, we can imagine projections of VR that don't require glasses, and so, but that's way far in the future.
Yeah, it seems like the benefits of that obviously is that it doesn't diminish our in-person interactions.
Right.
Like any barrier, even as translucent it may be, that goes against our ability to use that in public.
Right.
And
but I certainly want the pair of glasses that does face recognition and tells me, you've met this person before, this is that person's name. Mm-hmm. I'd pay a lot of money for that. Also, what I want is teleconferencing that works. I want the holographic teleport thing. I want the person to appear here. I will pay so much money for that right now. Yeah. So there are things that, and I would wear those glasses, believe me. I have no problem wearing.
We would too, I think.
Wearing some heavy, dark glasses that did that, I would wear them.
Well, it's kind of a club. I think people who wear them have no problem seeing other people wear them, because they understand the benefits of it.
Right.
If you're someone who hasn't adopted that yet,
right.
it looks very strange.
Right, but I think it was just the recording thing, which was really at the edge of social acceptance, that just killed Google Glass.
Yeah.
And they couldn't stick around long enough to iterate. So, and that would be an issue. We still haven't figured out what we as society think about people recording each other as a civilian.
And the spectacles, is that what they're called? The glasses, they're out $200 and all they do is record.
Right, right.
Snapchat, yeah.
Yeah, and so, we don't know how we feel about it. We're still figuring out, and it may be a long time before we figure that out. And there's lots of issues about, well, if you're recording me, do I have access to that, or should I have access to what you recorded about me? Why not? And so, this is going to be a long conversation.
So much of the type of experiences that we use in VR and even AR, they're magical experiences, but they're still grounded in the reality of what we understand to be physics. Like even if it's a telepresence hologram sitting here or an object dance around this table, they follow the rules of the world that we believe in. A lot of the most interesting experiences we have in VR kind of break those rules, kind of warp physics and space.
Right, they shift, alter gravity, or things like that.
Have the people you've talked to dove into those tricks, and where do you see our understanding of reality changing? From
the very beginning, Jaron Lanier back in the 80s, this was a constant theme of his. In fact, for a while I was trying to help him write a book, and we recorded, 100 hours of conversation of Jaron talking about all the things that you could do. He imagined even something extreme as what he called post-symbolic language communication. His idea was that rather than say, I'd like to eat a banana split at this restaurant, that you could generate those images of a banana, you eating it in a restaurant, faster than you could actually write those words. And that therefore you wouldn't use symbols to communicate, you would actually use the things themselves to have a language, okay? So, but he also talked a lot about and imagined, alternative universes where you'd play with physics, you'd play with identity, you'd play with alternatives of all sorts. And so people have been thinking about that for a very long time. But the researchers there's actually been at least 10 years of research in actually having some data about this. So there's a phenomenon called body transfer in VR. And it is that if your avatar is given a virtual mirror in the space so that you can see yourself what you look like in that space, and you look like a lobster in that virtual mirror, you will actually transfer your presence into that lobster. Or it could be, say, you could change the gender. You actually move your center of identity into those limbs, and you see yourself as inside this new form. And you start to behave as if you have claws. You start to behave as if you were female. And so that body transfer, actually, they can demonstrate that it actually works. And so that's this one aspect of this kind of alternative world that you can make, and you can shift things around. And a common thing was they could shift your senses so that you would have to use your arms to kick and your feet to move your arms, and you'd have to rewire your brain. And it was really amazing how fast the brain would rewire.
Kids do that all the time.
Yeah,
you know, they play dress up, and they'll spend hours at it, but adults forget.
Right, but the thing is, our brain is pretty plastic, and so we can adapt to those, and they can be fun, and they can be useful, they can be teaching moments, but there are probably other things we haven't discovered about them. So yes, the whole vista of alternative physics, alternative worlds, alternative identities is out there. And what we've known so far is that it really does work. You can really make these things. You can change, you can widen your empathy because you have the experience. And so I talk about this shift from the internet of information to the internet of experiences. That what we're going to be making with VR, and there'll be shared VR worlds or extended distributed VR worlds, is that we're going to be sharing, buying, purchasing, downloading experiences. That's the currency. These things that you don't, it's not that you know them, so you take the stuff off, you don't remember having seen something, you remember having experienced it. So these experiences and empathy is the currency that we're going to be, that's going to be kind of propelling this economy, propelling the development. And that's a new mark in society. That's a new thing. That's big. It's very large.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I want to end with is, of all the things that are inevitable, you feel like these forces, you know, in the VR and AR landscape, we always think about the metaverse. Is a metaverse, a version of a metaverse, is that inevitable in your eyes?
I think. Yes, I think it's some version of a very large shared universe in VR is inevitable, just because the economics of it are so powerful. So in all networks, there's something called the network effect, increasing returns, which says that the more members in a network, that the value of a network increases by the square of the number of members. So you have exponential growth in the value for arithmetic growth in the members. So the members are only increasing linearly, but the value is increasing exponentially. So here's where it comes in, is that the more valuable it becomes, the more people want to join.
Right.
And so then you have this explosive thing, which is what we've seen with Facebook and Google. And so the rewards early, you know, winner takes all. So VR is definitely going to exhibit network effects, which means that having one very large world is going to be so attractive and so powerful that everybody wants to join it, which will make it even bigger. And so yes, there will be a metaverse, but there'll probably be more than one. And there'll probably be, you know, and through the history, it's not that there'll be one forever. There'll be disruptions coming as people figure out how to do this better without goggles, whatever. So, but I think having these very, very super large worlds that are shared, even at the scale of billions of people, yes, that's inevitable.
It sounds like you imagine that will be privately owned. I wonder if we're going to see the Facebook or the MySpace of the metaverse, or if it will be the internet. I guess a better comparison might be, will it be AOL? Or will it be the internet for the metaverse?
Right, exactly. And there may be levels of it. So there may be a certain protocol, exchange protocol, a certain communication thing that is open and flat and international and whatever, and then maybe the higher levels are run by corporations. I suspect that as people understand the value of this, that there'll be more interest in trying to regulate it at the governmental level, particularly when it wants to be an international thing, which transcends the interest in the laws of one country. And so, in imagining the metaverse, it's not just so much whether it's privately held or government. It's like, well, what government is like, or is it a UN thing? So there's, if you want to be kind of idealistic and hopeful, there's actually a possibility that would be the beginning of kind of a world government, for better or worse, in the sense that you'd have to have something that transcended national issues, like what laws is going to govern what happens inside this shared world that is transnational. So you have to have maybe a new set of agreements. And so, so this is what I would say about all the technologies is, while these are inevitable, the character and specifics are not inevitable, and we have a huge choice about these. We get to choose, and that matters hugely to us. The internet was inevitable, but not what kind of internet. Whether it was transnational, commercial, open or closed, was not at all inevitable, and we had a choice, and it matters a lot. So the metaverse is inevitable, but whether it's open, closed, national, transnational, commercial, private, is not, and we have a choice about it, and it matters.
Seems pretty hopeful to me. Thank you so much, Kevin, for coming in and giving us enthusiasts, I think, a lot to think about.
Yeah, well, it's going to be very exciting. I'm so glad you guys are figuring out and inventing our future for us.
And your book is called The Inevitable. It's out in paperback right now.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Our showcase this week is on a new non-gaming, it's an art tool that's for free on both the Vive and Oculus platforms, and it's made by Google.
Yeah, it's called Blocks, and Google first has introduced us to art tools with Tilt Brush, right? And that's $20 on Steam. This is totally free, so anybody can dive into this, and I think that it's free for a reason, because anybody can use this tool. It's really, really simple.
Yeah, it's accessible. It really is like building blocks in VR. So we've seen a whole spectrum of different kind of art creation tools, both on the Google side and the Facebook side, with Medium on the Facebook side kind of being the sculptural tool, but using a lot of in-game post-processing effects so that you're making a mesh that isn't exactly what you see when you export that file. With blocks, you are working with vertices and faces and polygons,
right?
But in the form of these shapes, these primitives.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about the tool is that it has a snapping mechanism. So I mean, with Medium's amazing, but you really have to have some artistic ability in order to actually sculpt as you would from clay.
It's freeform. Right,
whereas with blocks, you can actually turn on a snapping feature that then wherever your tool goes in the world, around it you see this sort of ghosted grid in 3D space, and your tool will then snap to that, which allows you to throw down a block. But then when you want to put another one down, you can put it exactly next to it, and you can start to form what is essentially, three-dimensional pixel art in a very accurate grid.
Yeah, the alignment that you get from that grid is something that's essential, I think, to CAD tools, because you want precision. Yeah. If you want to have the sphere perfectly aligned with, like, cut right to the top of the center of the cube, you need the snapping tool. And you can adjust, scale everything up and down in terms of the shapes. You have your spheres, your cylinders, your pyramids, and your cubes, and they can be big and small, but you can't increase the precision of the snapping.
That's my one complaint, is that it's all about that snapping to me. So I would like them to be able to refine that, you can turn it off, but I want to be able to tell it how sensitive I want it to be.
Right.
If I get anywhere near the shape, I just want it to snap there immediately. Like, the one thing that takes a while is you do have to get real careful and get right in there, because if you move like 3 centimeters away, it then snaps to the next grid over,
And in terms of the actual geometry of what you're building, it really is vertices and faces. And there's a mode in Blocks, which is like a very advanced tool, where you can actually pull the actual points and change what these shapes look like. You know, a pyramid doesn't have to be a pyramid if you can stretch the top of it or pull this vertices or pull this face out.
That's right.
And you can really get creative. It's, I think, a very, very powerful CAD ability in a VR sculpting tool.
I think it really lends itself to this low poly look. You know, low poly is this whole subgenre in 3D printing especially, where it just has this kind of tessellated look to 3D geometry with flat sides and angles everywhere. And that's what you can make with this very, very easily. In addition to your standard kind of voxel pixel art.
The thing that I also think is missing from this is Boolean operations, like advanced Boolean operations. And what I mean is when you use like a 2D tool like Tinkercad, right? You also have your shapes, your spheres, and your volumes, but you can subtract one from the other. You can create a cavity inside, turn any shape into an eraser, essentially. And here, you don't have that. You can erase individual shapes and by selecting it and say, get rid of that, and go undo and go forward and backward, but you can't combine and make advanced geometry that way.
Yeah, I'm not much of a 3D modeler, but I live by Boolean operations when I do it because it's so much easier to create a shape and then carve stuff out. But I can understand the argument for not putting it in this. I mean, once you start carving, that geometry becomes infinitely more complex. And then if you want to make adjustments in there, the way that all of that has to work together, it would be hard to manage if you make an accident. Then again, there is a nice undo function with the left stick. I think it's like left to undo and right to redo. It's interesting. There's only maybe 32 colors to pick from in the palette, if you want to paint. So I think that by design, every feature of this tool is limited, and with good reason.
And it's limited to increase accessibility. And there are fundamentally two different approaches to accessibility here when you're talking about blocks versus medium. I don't know. I can't decide which one I think is more intuitive. I can think geometrically with blocks. That's like building in Minecraft or building with Lego.
Exactly.
And I can build that shape, but it's not as fluid as an intuition as just free-form sculpting as in medium. They're almost diametrically opposed in terms of the types of geometry you're making out of it and the versatility of that geometry. But it's really great that we're seeing different approaches to art tools in VR.
Absolutely.
And free.
And especially with this one is free. I mean, it's like now you decide what you want to make, and you have to decide which tool is right for you.
So please check that out. It's called Blocks. It's in the Vive store as well as the Oculus store, and it's made free by Google. And share with us your creations. There are some great things in their gallery right now. You can mess with that stuff as well.
That's right.
Have fun with that. Yeah. We'll be back next week with another projections, another game interview, a demo, and a showcase. But please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.